Hello, welcome to the Football Diary podcast. The room for manoeuvre is getting less and less in the Premier League this season as it nears its final stretch. Sheffield United are confirmed as relegated after their thrashing at Newcastle, but who will join them? That's the question. I'll be asking Miles and Dave their thoughts today, as well as in the Champions League race. Villa drawing to Chelsea, but Spurs losing in the North London derby, which is where we're going to start actually, because that also has obvious permutations on the title race. So Tottenham 2, Arsenal 3. Arsenal 3 goals up in the first 38 minutes, which is a racing out of the blocks kind of start, isn't it? But a goalkeeper error and a penalty let Spurs back in, Miles. It's a weird mix of emotion, isn't it, for Mikel Arteta? But what do you think his overriding feeling will be on the back of this monumental victory for them?
He's got to be chuffed with it still. It's obviously a problem to let a team back into a game like this, but this was certainly Arsenal's hardest fixture remaining, going away to their North London rivals. I was talking to an Arsenal fan yesterday who was saying that if they played the game, they would win. If they played the occasion, then it would be difficult. The first half, they played the game, definitely. They had a real clear game plan to hurt Spurs with set pieces and counter-attacks. Second half, it looked like they got a bit rattled by the occasion. And Spurs were probably the better side for a lot of the game. But Arsenal got the 3 points, and that is all that matters at this stage of the season, getting the points on the board.
Yeah, I think the majority of possession went to Spurs, Dave, in the game, didn't it, really? But tactically, I think Arsenal got it spot on. I think Arteta, as you say, he's done it many times this season with counters and set plays. But the way that Spurs conceded those goals was pretty sloppy too. And I think Postecoglou was actually pretty frustrated with just being defensively poor, wasn't he? But let's talk about Arsenal and how they did set up to win. It's a game plan that really worked, wasn't it? And Arteta clearly did his homework for this occasion, didn't he?
Certainly, I think in this particular game, I think he looked to keep things quite narrow and close off them spaces for Spurs. And albeit Spurs probably had the majority of the game, in particularly in the first start off, they really looked like they were threatening in those opening periods. Had a couple of really good opportunities, which they didn't take. But Arsenal actually really exposed them in behind, and I think they really exposed those pockets of space in between midfield and defence, and you saw it kind of in the transition. I thought particularly the Saka goal, I think they'll be really frustrated with, because I think with Saka, we all know how much he loves to cut inside on that left foot, and they just let him cut in too easily and got punished for it. And just the amount of space that he had to take that, it was a beautiful touch, how we just literally plucked it straight out of the air. But the amount of space that he had in particular would be really frustrating, I think. And I'm sure he'll be furious, to be honest, Postecoglou, with that particular goal itself. But do you know what? I thought how Arsenal managed this game as well, particularly after they went 3-1 down. They managed to just stem the tide a little bit. It almost looks like, particularly because the atmosphere in the stadium just it went up a few notches. The Spurs fans really got behind the team, and I was actually quite impressed with how Arsenal managed it. And I think that speaks volumes of how they've come on as a team in terms of their mentality and managing games in high pressure situations, which Miles mentioned. Obviously, we've seen them kind of come undone in the past, but I think they actually did really well until obviously Spurs got that second goal, which, to be honest, is probably a little bit unfortunate for Declan Rice. I think with that challenge, I think he just got caught cold a little bit. Probably tired legs came into it. But I think I agree. I think they can be really relieved. I think there's a sense of relief there because I think they probably would have worried, particularly after that second goal they conceded. But I think putting themselves in this situation with so few games left now, where that's been their undoing in the past, they haven't been able to quite take it to the very last couple of games of the season, and they're in a great situation right now.
Yeah, I think you're right about the mentality changing, but I think there was a point where it did go to 3-2, where I think the feeling in the stadium is a comeback on the cards, and, especially because of the way they conceded the goals, a goalkeeping error, which is completely unavoidable and against the run of play. And then obviously the penalty, like you say, it's the worst way to kind of it's almost gifting goals back to the opposition, isn't it? So at that point, it could have collapsed, couldn't it? And Spurs were pushing at some points. So I guess, Miles, it is kind of an indicator of where Arsenal are in this title race, isn't it? It feels like they are, I dare say, mentally strong, because they have had wobbles, haven't they, in recent times even. But it surely is, like Dave said, a huge relief, really. That must be the overriding feeling.
Yeah, I think so. It's always a relief to get a win over your fiercest rivals, particularly at this sort of stage in the season anyway. But with everything they've got on the line, it could have been massive. And imagine the pressure that it would put on someone like David Raya if his mistake had cost them the game there. But actually, instead, they can celebrate a hard-fought win. And that's really important now with this running coming, because you can't see City dropping points really. But on the off chance that they do, Arsenal just have to keep getting these 3 points over the line each time. And I just wanted to say, I think there's a player that's been overlooked for quite how strong his contribution is to that. And Kai Havertz, again, another goal, another assist. I think he'll go down as an assist, but even if it doesn't, excellent ball over to Saka. Worth noting that he was being written off as this awful signing. He's got 12 goals and 6 assists in the league this season.
Yeah.
For Chelsea, he played 91 games in the Premier League, scored 19 goals and got 7 assists. So he's nearly matching that in one season at Arsenal. I think it shows the impact that he's having on this side and Arteta's having on him and his career, because he looks like a player reborn now.
Yeah, you're right, actually, because in some ways, we'd not written him off necessarily. I just think when he was signed, we didn't see the logic in where he'd fit in the system. And in some ways, he still hasn't found a natural position within this Arsenal setup, has he? But he's getting himself in positions to score goals. I mean, the header he scored, you forget how tall he is as well. Like, he leapt so high for that. But the defence was poor, wasn't it? Was it Van der Ven marking him, which seems like a mismatch as well? But yeah, Havertz, what a player, what a turnaround he's had in his career. And it could be one of those signings we look back on and go, well played Arsenal, because it was a bit of a flip of the coin, that one, wasn't it?
Well, do you know what's interesting? He's obviously really excelled in that sort of false nine role when Jesus has been out, and that's where we've kind of seen him come to his own. But there's so much talk about Arsenal signing a striker in the summer. If they do that, then what happens to Havertz? Because actually, I wonder if he's proved now that they don't really need to do that, and they're quite good at what they've got right now.
And Trossard as well. I think he's contributed brilliantly
fantastic.
in the last few weeks. And I think there's threats there that in previous times, last season especially, they didn't have much of a plan B. But I think in some ways, Dave, they're showing in games like this that they've got a plan B and a plan C, and just there's tactical versatility there if they need it.
Yeah, and I think you're right, to be honest. I think particularly what they've got now in the attacking areas, we've mentioned, obviously, they've got kind of different avenues to explore. They've obviously got Trossard in there, who's really good in these particular games where obviously they're looking to link a little bit more centrally. And then obviously if they want to go to plan B, they've got Martinelli, who can obviously exploit that space on the wings and wider areas. So they have got different ways of playing, and I think that's. I think they do want probably a striker, a finisher who. So if they want the option of playing that way, then they can, because I think that's probably what they do lack at the minute, just that natural, clinical striker, which I think that's probably one of the final pieces for them, to be honest. I don't know where you look at elsewhere in that lineup, to be honest, that needs really improving. I think they're really coming into their own. I think they've got a lot of young players as well, you think, obviously, who can develop even further. So I think it's really promising times for them, to be honest.
Final note on Spurs, Mike. I want your opinion here, though, because we're obviously going to go on to talk about my boys in a bit, but they've got 5 games left, 2 games in hand on Villa in 4th, 7 points behind them now. Is it still doable? Still got to play Chelsea, Liverpool and City. You've got Sheffield United and Burnley, which you'd imagine are bankers for them. 7 points. Can you see them making that up now?
I wouldn't rule anything out, but I think the run-ins, it looks difficult for Spurs, I think, to not drop points. I think that's the main thing. I can see Villa more likely keeping up their points total more than Spurs. And I think the negative effect that it can have being behind on points with games in hand can't be understated. I think we said this during the COVID season, didn't we? That so many teams were catching up with games that you look at it and think, oh yeah, them 2 games in hand are a guaranteed 6 points, but they're not. And I think that's the mentality Spurs won't have. I don't think they'll see them as, oh, we're only a point behind. They'll see it as 7 points. They've got to make that ground up. So I think at this stage of the season, it's all about mentally how you face into the rest of the season. And I think Villa have probably got the more positive outlook, looking at the fixtures, but also the fact they've got points on the board.
Well, that's the thing. Spurs. So, like I say, Spurs have got Chelsea, Liverpool, City, Burnley, Sheffield United. How many points do you want to see Spurs getting from those games? At a push, 7.
Do you think?
Right. Well, they'll beat Sheffield United and Burnley. a draw against Chelsea is more than feasible. They might even win that. So in that case, being favourable to them, you'd say 9. They're 7 points behind Villa, which would mean Villa would need one more win. And they've got Brighton, Liverpool, and Crystal Palace.
Yeah.
Brighton are terrible at the moment, and Villa have got a great record against them.
I love how you've worked this out for the most positive angle.
Yeah, I've tried that point. Well, we'll come on to it in a minute, I guess, won't we?
And we'll stay with you for that, actually, because, a point for Villa against Chelsea. I mean, Villa raced into a 2-0 lead, didn't they? And it looked like one of those afternoons for Chelsea where we were questioning how good they are and whether the quality's there. Is Pochettino the right guy? And actually thinking Villa have got this. They've wrapped it up and top four's in the bag and all this. But obviously half-time happens. Emi Martinez doesn't emerge for the second half, and everything seemed to change, didn't it? The whole defensive setup for Villa meant Chelsea found a way back in, and 2-2 kind of looks like a point gain now rather than 2 lost, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's frustrating, of course, to not take 3 points when you're 2-0 up at home. And we've seen that a couple of times this season. Normally we're really good. When we score first, I think we've lost 1 and drawn 2. And won every other game, which is fantastic. But like the United game was a perfect example. We're 2-0 up there at half-time and end up throwing that away. This one here. But it could have been so much worse. And actually, that point makes the gap 7 points instead of 6, like I say. And that might be all it needed. 67 points might be enough to get us 4th. And that's huge. And obviously, it also meant we claimed Europa League football. Emery was big to point that out, that we've now guaranteed a 5th place finish, which... That's progress from last season, plus we've been playing in the European competition. You do have to take that on board and say that's excellent for Villa to have achieved. And particularly when the circumstances really did not favour us. Like, we were already missing so many players. I've talked about it almost every week, the amount of players we're missing. And then you mentioned Martinez not coming out for the second half. Tielemans going off in the first half just meant we lost so much control of the game. And I think that's something that I think we should unpick a little bit further. What impact Emi Martinez going off actually has.
Well, I was going to say, you were saying in our group chat that the tactical setup for the defence was totally changed without the voice and the presence and the passing ability out from the back of Martinez. And probably highlights another weakness of this Villa team is that Robin Olsen is just not a good enough number 2, is he? You've been saying that since he's joined the club. Are you concerned by that as the backup option as goalkeeper? And do you see him ever getting in sync with what this defence needs and what they've built up with Martinez commanding them?
It feels horrible kind of criticising a Villa player. And actually there was one moment in particular in this game that he did incredibly well, where he made this excellent save from Cole Palmer. And that's the sort of thing that we're used to seeing Martinez do. So there is definitely credit in the bank for him for that. However, the biggest difference actually wasn't even his performance. It was the way that the defence reacts to him. So for example, that Palmer chance is a perfect point of this. The ball is bouncing back towards goal. Diego Carlos has a simple job of passing the ball back to Olsen, but there looks like there's a reluctance from the defence to do that. Now, if Martinez is in goal, I am fully confident that Carlos rolls that ball back to the keeper. And instead, he tries to get his boot round it and try this weird flick. And it seems like there's a bit of a lack of trust. There was a couple of times, Pau Torres in the second half, who's normally so good at distributing the ball, forced the ball out of play because it looked like he didn't want to pass the ball back to Olsen. And actually, when you look at the possession stats, Chelsea dominated the ball. And typically what would happen there is if that was happening to Villa, they would get the ball back to Martinez and he would spend some time on the ball. I saw the other day, no player in the Premier League has spent more time with the ball at their feet this season than Emi Martinez. Because he loves doing that. He draws the press out and then he finds the option. And he will stand with the ball there for 20 seconds if he needs to. But it looked like they didn't trust Olsen to do that. And what that meant was they couldn't play their normal possession holding game and gave Chelsea far more of the ball than they wanted to in the second half. And we saw that Chelsea could hurt us in the cup game earlier in the season. And that same thing came to fruition here. You've got one goal from long range, which is outstanding, but I do wonder if Martinez gets a bit closer to it. And you've got a constant worry of keeping the ball at your feet. And without Tielemans and Martinez, arguably two of our most important players to keep possession, they really gave the game up to Chelsea, and it was a shame.
Have we had any news on the injury yet for Martinez? Do we know what the outlook is for him?
Not firmly, no. Emery said that both him and Tielemans would have to be assessed still. Now, we're playing on Thursday, obviously. Martinez is suspended after his yellow card in the penalty shootout. So Olsen will be back in goal for that one. He will need to get up to speed quickly. because it
Yeah.
is the most important part of our season now. We are so close to clinching fourth place. We are so close to clinching a trophy. And no one, there's no goalkeeper we could have that would live up to Emi Martinez as a number two. It's impossible. We've got the best goalkeeper in the world. You then can't follow that up with a good substitute. It's not possible. But Olsen still can play a massive part in our success this season. And I would be happy for him to see him do that. We all want to get behind him.
It's funny how the tone changed when we started talking about the run-in and looking ahead to whether Spurs will look at it more favourably than Villa. And then as soon as we mentioned the injuries, the further injuries to the many that we've had this season, suddenly changes the outlook because there's so many buts. And I think that's the question for you, Dave. If you look at Villa's run-in, and we were talking about how much of a more positive outlook it is for Villa, are you looking at it in a different way with the Martinez and Tielemans injuries? Obviously, depending on how serious they are, do you think that changes the top four race much?
I think we obviously spoken earlier in the season when obviously Pau Torres picked up that injury and had that little spell. I think Martinez is probably, along with him, and there's probably a couple of the players in that team that are absolutely essential to the way that Villa operate. And I just wonder actually whether maybe obviously Emery's instructions are different for when Olsen's in goal, and that creates. But I don't know if it creates a little bit of a hesitation in their play.
Yeah,
and it looks that way at times.
Well, we saw that when De Gea was in goals at the start of Ten Hag's reign, didn't we? He just couldn't adapt as much,
No. So,
and that's why Raya's coming at Arsenal as well. Like that is a thing. If a goalkeeper isn't as competent with his feet, then what are their defenders supposed to do when they're trying to pass? That extra man is the one that's unmarked most of the time. It's the goalkeeper. So if he's good enough with his feet, it does everything for you.
I think that result today in the Spurs game will have given Villa a lot of confidence. I think
massive boost.
I think that will have. I think it's a little bit too much for Spurs, and if I'm being honest, really, I think there's a lot of ground to make up there. Villa have got the points on the board. I think they're in a really strong position. So I'll be really surprised to see them sort of let it slip now.
I think 4 points confirms it. 3 points might be enough, and I'm quite confident in that.
It's just whether they can get it right on the training ground to get Olsen up to speed for however long he's in goals for. But hopefully Martinez is back as soon as he can be. Really, the next league game would be ideal.
And to be honest, there were a few players that were off it as well. It wasn't just about Olsen. Definitely not. Like I say, Torres' distribution got a lot weaker in the second half. Carlos, it was the worst I've seen him play for a long time when he came on, because he's been really good lately. Luis looked like he really struggled to get to the pace of the game. Caicedo had his number for most of the game.
Backing off, wasn't there? Like there was no high line, there was no pressing. It was just literally letting Chelsea come at them, which is surprising, really.
In the first half, Bailey was excellent, and other than that, I think most of them looked like they weren't really up to it yet. And Rodgers as well, actually. We talked about Rodgers, didn't we, last week, and the impact he was starting to have, and he showed it again. One thing, Villa fans, if you're watching, I wonder if any of you noticed it, because nothing seemed to get picked up about it. On the way out for the first half, Pochettino and Duran were very, very pally. And now, bear in mind, they've never worked together before. They're not like kinsmen from the same country or anything like that. But there was massive rumours of Chelsea trying to get Duran in January. And they're in like a big cuddle on the way out at Villa Park. It really annoyed me, and no one seemed to pick up on that at the time. But I wonder if anyone else spotted it and got wound up by it.
Yeah, that is odd, isn't it? But quick word on Chelsea, actually, before we move on, Dave, because I've been trying to contend with my own mind whether they're worse than Man United and whether their season's worse than Man United. But there's been moments where Chelsea have actually dug deep and found character that I didn't expect. And obviously Villa kind of let them back in a little bit in this respect with the Martinez injury. It kind of made the game a bit more open for them. But they do have that desire and a few players that can pull some moments of magic out. Like Conor Gallagher's goal was brilliant, wasn't it? And I thought Caicedo was really good as well. So there are some positives in this Chelsea team.
Madueke.
I just think they look different without Enzo Fernandez. Their midfield just looks so much more balanced. What do you make of Chelsea after seeing them in the last few games especially, and obviously comeback draws and wins that they've had and some last gasp winners, Cole Palmer's form? There's some positives there, but what do you make of their prospects?
They're just an enigma, aren't they, I think, Chelsea, as a team. You don't know what to expect from them. Obviously, in midweek against Arsenal, they were absolutely terrible. And then this game, they obviously had some really strong periods of play. And you mentioned there, obviously, Caicedo, I think he had a really good game, actually. It's not been his best first season with Chelsea at all. I think he would feel he'd probably be able to perform a lot better than he has done. And I think consistency's not been there. But I think it's been like that with a lot of the players. You got to remember this is a lot of the players' first seasons at this club. It's still a little bit of a mess in terms of stability. I think they don't. I'm still unsure whether he knows what his best team is. Pochettino.
Well, Miles, you were saying you looked at their bench, and not for the first time, we went, who are these players and where's the money gone? So there is a kind of part of you that thinks they need to invest further, which is crazy. But
mental.
But where and how and what's happened there? Because they've invested in these players and they've committed, long-term contracts to them, so they have to make it work.
Yeah, it's true. Like I mentioned the injuries that Villa had, but there are a lot of players missing for Chelsea as well. Like Nkunku still out, James, Chilwell, Gusto. There was a lot of players missing in this one. But look to their bench, 2 goalkeepers, Disasi, a load of academy teenagers that have never played. I thought this team spent £1 billion. How is that possible? Yeah, I still feel like you asked that question about Man United and Chelsea and comparing them, and it's quite easy to do that at the moment. I feel like Chelsea's ceiling is higher. I feel like they're starting something. And we've seen glimpses of it being brilliant. We've seen examples of it being awful and not clicking yet. I wonder if next season we see them kick on quite well. I think they will add in the summer. Of course they will, because it's Chelsea. And I think they'll stick with Pochettino as well and give him a bit more time. And actually, this could click. Like, there's a talented group of players there. There's a few of them that I can't see making it. Like Mudryk, again, I just thought he was terrible again. I don't see what he brings to this side. But then Madueke, like I mentioned, gets a bit more game time and he looks absolutely dynamite. And that is a team that have the right foundations if they get a few improvements done, I think. I think Chelsea look like they're in a lot better shape than we maybe anticipated, despite the fact they just come off the back of a paste into Arsenal.
Yeah, very true. Well, there's still some chance of them sort of breaking into the top 6, top 7 even. But they've squandered a bit of that chance really as well with some results lately, haven't they? But
the offside, the final goal, are we going to mention that? The disallowed goal? Because Chelsea fans will be livid if we don't.
I feel like we have to, but
it was a foul.
I don't feel like we're the right crowd to discuss the rights and wrongs of it, because I think any neutral will go, what's the complaint about? Because it was a clear foul. Like, it stopped. Go on.
Can I be honest? I cannot get my head around the level of complaint. Like, VAR has got a few decisions a bit dodgy lately. We know that. There are plenty of contentious decisions. This is not the hill to die on as a Chelsea player or fan. Like, it's very, very clearly a foul. He made no attempt to play the ball. He pushed through his back. It wasn't shoulder to shoulder. I cannot get why they were so... Obviously, the emotions take over the moment. I wonder if a few of them watched it back afterwards and went, I've made a right tit of myself there.
Well, to be honest, you think about the way VAR can change a game on a subjective decision and for it to be like still debated afterwards. This, for me, is one of those ones where it actually felt like the justice was done. And it felt like, you imagine if the game had actually been won on that moment, how would you be feeling? What kind of sense of justice would you be feeling?
I'd be livid.
Can you imagine?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it'd be huge. But yeah, VAR got it right on this occasion, on that rare occasion for once. We'll give them their dues. But yeah, Chelsea still got something to play for, it feels like. But one team that have got nothing left to play for is Sheffield United, who sunk to a 5-1 defeat to Newcastle. They are confirmed as relegated now, one of the worst performing teams in Premier League history, and they've still got time to make it even worse. Was it minus 97 goal difference? 97 goals conceded, but minus what goal difference? 63? That is still football to be played. That is bad, isn't it? But we'll talk about the relegation picture, obviously above them, in a moment. But let's talk about Newcastle for a moment, shall we, Dave? Because we've talked about them quite a lot on this podcast this season alone because of their ups and downs, their injuries. And they are still in a good position to finish in a qualifying position for Europe. Their form lately has been much better since players have started coming back into the team. Some key players performing for them. Loads of players that stood out in this game as well, but it wasn't exactly difficult against Sheffield United. What do you make of their prospects? And do you think they've got a chance of kind of usurping Manchester United into sixth place based on both teams' form?
I mean, the way things are heading at the minute, you'd anticipate that, wouldn't you? I think. I agree. I think if you look at it and you think they're a little bit more less unlucky in terms of the injuries they've suffered this season, I think you've got to wonder probably what could have been, whether their season could have been a lot better than what it has. And I think they've struggled to display that kind of consistency at times. You mentioned there they've been on a really good run of late, minus an indifferent performance in the week. But they've actually responded really well this weekend and really put in a really positive performance. Again, Isak looking absolutely brilliant. Again, wondering if he hadn't had the injuries that he's had this season, how far he could have gone, how many goals he could have had, because he's been absolutely outstanding. I think the foundations of this team, they've got a really strong core, actually, Newcastle. And like you mentioned there, what they can actually go on to achieve next season. Whether they've got obviously recruitment plan in place, because that's been a little bit disrupted with everything that's been going on with Dan Ashworth.
Yeah.
And they're obviously very eager to get a new director of football in, aren't they? So it'd be interesting to see what goes on there.
Yeah, you mentioned that looking ahead to next season, Dave, would be probably something that I think they'll have an eye on as well, because no matter where they finish this season, I think what they do next season will be that momentum builder, won't it? It'd be great if they could get Europa League football for that momentum, because I think we said on the pod about them last time, that's kind of the level they are sort of competitive at right now. And if they did have success in the Europa League, maybe that would be a catalyst for them to kind of kick on in the league as well. But Miles, looking ahead to next season and, a summer of transfer activity, when they've got a full squad, Newcastle, they aren't a bad squad at all, really. I mean, they've got some players that there's a big drop off, I think, from the first 11 down to the next available player. I think that's probably what they need to improve first, isn't it? Depth more than anything. But can you see them being able to facilitate that?
I think so, yeah. Like the depth is definitely the thing that's cost them across this season when injuries have hit them. The only thing will be whether FFP allows them to spend the money that we know they've got to bring it in without having to sell an asset. Because I'll be honest, Alexander Isak, what a player. And I would be very surprised if he wasn't getting attention from elsewhere, because he's now got 19 goals in 26 appearances this season.
Yeah,
That's phenomenal form.
It
That
comes out
absolutely
as
outstanding.
a goals per 90 ratio. Get this is how competitive it is. 0.88 goals per 90. I think Ollie Watkins is on 0.58, which is like completely ahead of the pack. Erling Haaland's on 0.85. Cole Palmer's on 0.83. So he's as prolific as those players. So by rights, if he'd have played 10 more games, how many goals would he have?
Yeah, it's crazy. He's been fantastic. I wonder if they hold on to him, hold on to Guimaraes, get Tonali back. Are we talking about them just back in the top four next season? Because you cannot argue that their season is completely hinged on the fitness of players. They've got 4 games left now, all of which look winnable. I mean, they've got an off chance of catching Spurs in 5th. And then all of a sudden we're talking about this is a fantastic season and Eddie Howe's done an amazing job again.
Yeah, I think that's the next question, isn't it? What's the measure of success for them this season? Do you think if they ended the season now and they finished in 7th as they are, would that be success considering all they've been through?
Depending on what happens to the European places, I think. If and it looks really unlikely. We didn't really mention this in the chat earlier about the coefficient. I think it would take Dortmund and Bayern losing both legs of their Champions League tie and Villa winning the Conference League to get England that 5th Champions League place now. It looks really unlikely. But if that happened and pushed Europa League down to 7th, that'd be amazing for Newcastle, definitely. But I'll be honest, I'm quite confident they're going to finish ahead of Man United. You've got each other to play, haven't you? And you cannot see United taking anything from that game in the way they're playing currently. So Newcastle finished 6th, get Europa League football. That's an excellent season when you've been contesting with the Champions League this year and the injuries you have. Like, I'll be honest, if Villa's squad got hit by that next season, I'd snap your hand off for 6th.
Yeah.
If we're in both those fronts. So yeah, I think it's been excellent from them.
I think on balance as well, when you factor in the Champions League and actually how well they performed in that group of death, you have to look back on that alone and go, what a great reintroduction to Champions League football for Newcastle, But yeah, I think the trajectory of Manchester United and Newcastle at the minute is completely opposite. Newcastle are literally on that upward trajectory, aren't they? Where the last 6-8 games have been overwhelmingly positive, apart from obviously that defeat in the week. But Manchester United is so indifferent. They're dropping points at regular intervals, aren't they? It feels like they're only kind of one good game away from an absolute capitulation, doesn't it? But Newcastle is a much more positive outlook than Manchester United. Dave was at Old Trafford for the United Burnley game, weren't you, mate? And they took the lead through Anthony, but again, let the team back in and didn't look like winning at all once that happened, did they?
No, it was a game of real sort of indecisive moments from United. We just weren't, particularly the first half hour. I thought actually we were okay. I thought we had a lot of decent chances. Probably should have been 1 or 2 ahead. But after that, particularly the second half, we just couldn't keep control of the game. We're just really sloppy in possession, a lot of turnovers, and Burnley actually had some very good opportunities. Probably the best opportunities in the game. And might feel a little bit unlucky in that they didn't come away with 3 points at the end of it. And I think they might rue it as a massive missed opportunity.
Well, I was going to say, you've seen Burnley up close now, and there was a point in the season where we were writing off Burnley with Sheffield United, weren't we, as being gone? But now there's 2 points separating them from out of the being out of the relegation zone. It's that tight at the bottom that all these extra points that Burnley have picked up in games like this out of nowhere, they've sort of clawed it back slowly, haven't they? Where the teams above them, Luton and Forest, have been trailing off. And before we talk about those two other relegation candidates, Dave, give us an insight into what you saw about Burnley's play and what prospects you think they've got of escaping relegation based on what you've seen.
I was actually really impressed with the defensive display. I've watched them throughout the season. I think there's been times when they've looked a little bit leaky at the back. They've been exposed a little bit too easily, but I thought they looked really organised as a unit, as a structure, and they actually control possession really well and actually move the ball so much better than United did through the lines, I thought. In the way that actually they expose United in certain spaces. I mean, we've seen it, a lot of teams do it to United, haven't we, throughout this season. But I actually thought they were really fluid in attack and actually in transition. They really impressed me. And they had some really good opportunities. Lyle Foster had a great chance, which Onana made really good save from. And
he made up for that, though, didn't he?
Well, I don't know about that. So I think for them, I think they might be a bit disappointed by it, because I think particularly how United have played this season, you don't really know what to expect from them, and they've conceded a lot of chances. I think they will feel as though maybe it was an opportunity missed. And I think if you look at the running now, those extra 2 points would have been so handy for them. They would have been in a position, I think they would have been level on points with Forest, albeit obviously a worse goal difference, so it wouldn't have been out the relegation zone. But then you look at that and you think, well, the next 3 games we can probably draw a couple of games and stay up, But they're in a situation where they've got to win 1 at least, you'd say.
To be fair, Burnley's last 3 games are Tottenham, Newcastle, and then Forest on the final day.
Massive game.
Like, if we're honest, Forest have got Sheffield United next Saturday. They win that, it's done. And also they've the verdict of their points deduction appeal comes out this week, supposedly, which could happen this season. Again, mental that we're still wondering whether that's going to impact who goes down, but it could be done by the end of the season, obviously, at which point it might be too late for Burnley, which would be a real shame, because actually they've showed that they were up for the fight at the end, while Sheffield United have just showed that they didn't have enough in the tank for it. Like, we moved past them quite quickly, Mike. They were 1-0 up against Newcastle, and I feel like I've seen, and the first half they were the better side. I feel like I've seen that a lot from Sheffield United. They've got themselves into games and they just capitulated in the biggest sense of the word.
Just a collective giving up, isn't it? I mean, they've got some players that you look back at the season and go, they actually did okay. 1 or 2 players that actually played okay. But I think collectively, as a defensive unit as well, they're so shambolic. Once the chips are down, it feels like that's it, and it opens the floodgates. Looking at the rest of the teams then and the run-ins they've got, you've mentioned Burnley's running miles, and obviously, if Forest win their next game against Sheffield United, that changes the shape of everything too. Luton are another one.
They played well today, by the way.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
Forest, they gave City a really good game.
Yeah, kind of restricted it to 2-0, but yeah, they always get chances, and especially at home, it's such a noisy place to go, isn't it? But then Luton have got Everton, West Ham, and Fulham, which are all games that could have literally nothing riding on them. I mean, Everton are already safe, so I mean, pick a team out of those. Pick 2. Who's staying up, mate? It's so hard to call, isn't it?
I think Forest are going to stay up, because I think they'll beat Sheffield United, and that will put them 5 points clear of Burnley and 4 clear of Luton. And I can't see Luton getting 4 points, and I can't see Burnley getting 5 points.
It
I
feels
think it's that
like
close.
out of the three, you could probably say, I know that fans would probably disagree with this, but Luton and Burnley will be the least affected by it financially, first of all. But also, I think they'll be favourites to come back up again because they've got.
Would they?
I think so. If they can keep their teams together, I think Burnley have got some really promising young signings they've made.
Yeah.
Luton are a very good collective, and I think they could, again, if they hold that team together, the core of it, and keep Rob Edwards, they could bounce back at the first time of asking.
True.
Because the teams that are potentially going to be promoted out of the Championship are by far the best teams in the Championship. Below that, I don't think many of them teams are any better than Luton or Burnley. So
I think the thing that Luton got going from is they didn't actually spend a lot in the summer.
No.
So it's
No.
not
The parachute payment would be
I don't
huge.
think there's going to be massive financial sort of problems there.
Well, they've got to future-proof themselves as well, haven't they? Because their revenue is not going to be huge with the amount of fans they can get into their ground. It's not going to get much match day revenue, is it? And commercially, they've never been a beast, have they? But Nottingham Forest have kind of got to stay in the Premier League, haven't they?
Yeah, they absolutely do. With their wage expenditure as well, like they'll absolutely have to. But I think they will.
Yeah.
I think they've got enough in them now. If this points deduction gets reduced to 2 points, for example,
Which could do, yeah.
2 points at this stage of the season is huge.
Yeah.
And then I think they'll beat Sheffield United quite comfortably. They're a much better side.
Are you in agreement with that, Dave, as well? Forest, if they beat Sheffield United and or get points, a couple of points added back on, that's pretty much it.
I think so. I think you look at the running, they've got the favourable by far for me, albeit obviously a tough last game against Burnley. Whether it gets that far or not, we'll see. But I think Luton have got to beat Everton on Friday. That's a huge game for them. I think if they can do that, then whatever Forest do, they'll still be in a position where they can stay up. But they need to get the business done first. I think they'll be encouraged by the return of some of their injured players. Obviously, Doughty came back in. Lokonga was back in for this Wolves game as well. So I think, they need to do the business against Everton, and then we'll see what happens. For me, I think for a neutral, I think we're all kind of hoping it goes down to the wire and it's not decided. Do you know what I mean? With 2 games left to play. But I think Forest, for me, are massive favourites.
It looked like a foregone conclusion at some points, didn't it? That the 3 promoted teams would get relegated. I think it's kind of indicative of how much they fought, but also how poor Forest have been at times. And, their squads on paper, it shouldn't be as close as it is. So, Forest have got things to work on, I think, whatever happens with the end of this season. But one team, as you mentioned, that is safe is Everton, which we'll finish the pod talking about their escape from relegation again. And it feels like by the skin of their teeth in some ways. But if you add them points back on that they've been deducted, it looks like a fairly successful season for them, doesn't it? Because that suddenly brings them up to mid-table and looking up the table at Europe. And, it could have been a whole different outlook for Sean Dyche and Everton had this points deduction not happened. So suddenly the new season looks like it's full of optimism. They've got a new stadium to move into and they can put this hopefully behind them. But I guess the question is, Miles, will they look back on it as a success? And do you foresee Sean Dyche kind of guiding them through that next season?
Yeah, I think so. I think it has to be considered really an achievement that they're this safe already. Like the run of form they've been on in the last 5 games has done everything they needed. And actually, it's funny because you can pretty much put Everton's whole season down to those 2 spells, one just after the first points deduction and one now when it matters. And actually, I think that's an indication of what Sean Dyche does as a manager, because when their backs are against the wall, when that points deduction hit, he motivated the team to get out of it. And then right at the end of the season, when it looked like they were in the relegation picture, he's done the same thing again. He's given them that gear to go up. And you mentioned, without the 10 points, they're 12th. They're above Brighton. They're level on points with Wolves. They're 3 points behind West Ham. They've achieved 3 less points in the league than West Ham in 8th this season. Like, that's fantastic. That's a really good season for Everton when you consider them. They've been surviving by the skin of their teeth the last couple of seasons. And obviously, it feels like that's happened again this year. But it is a false position, isn't it? No one can say otherwise.
Yeah, I think Everton, flattered to deceive, haven't they, for a few years now? And I think their fans will be honest about how the club's been run, and their transfer policy has been so hit and miss in the last decade, even, hasn't it? That they're kind of paying the price for that now. So I think a lot of this this season, kind of the struggles they have had and the moments they have had, have not really been Sean Dyche's problem, have they, Dave? They've been something he's trying to fight against, and this culture of negativity and the points deductions are a legacy of what he's inherited. So I guess the question now is whether he can actually put his mark on a team that is still not 100% a Sean Dyche team. He's not had much money to spend. There'll probably be a lot of kind of caution, I think, in the transfer market still going forward, because another points deduction is the last thing they need. So I guess how do Everton proceed in the summer? Do they need to sell to buy, or do you think they need to build on what they've already got?
I think there's a big question there about the top of the club, isn't there, really? I think fans want answers to that, because that's largely going to dictate what sort of path they take now, and whether... Do you know what? I really like the job that Dyche has done. I think he's actually given them a lot of stability in a really difficult period for them, where they've, you look at the course of the season, it's been a bit of a nightmare of a season for them. But I think there's a lot of reasons to be positive at the minute. Obviously, that game in midweek against Liverpool, which I still think the riding the wave of, was such a good result. And they played so well. Everton did actually played brilliantly. In what I think probably a lot of fans wouldn't have expected to get a win from that, personally. The situations that both teams are in. So I think there's a lot to look forward to. I think in the summer, like you mentioned there, the new stadium, that's going to be amazing for the fans. And I just think the fans want to know what direction they're going in. They want to know that the recruitment's going to be right. They want to know this decision-making is going to be right. But I think they've got a good manager in there who I think can take them forward and take them out of this period of uncertainty for Everton.
Yeah, well, I think the relegation picture has kind of narrowed so much this season as the games have gone on, and Everton has sort of slowly pulled themselves away. But it's been impressive to see, and I think this is another credit to Sean Dyche, really, is the way the players have dug in when it mattered. And I think that Liverpool game is like the pinnacle of the season. That's kind of something they'll live off for the rest of the season now, and they'll be quite proud of their team that they dug deep and found that. So yeah, optimism is everything in football, isn't it? Momentum. So
it threw a huge grenade into their rival season as well, didn't it? Basically knocked them out of the title race. You've now got their star player and their outgoing beloved manager arguing at the touchline. Salah saying, "There's going to be fire if I speak now." What a great week for Everton. Secure Premier League safety. Show that you've actually got something to give in this league and take it away from Klopp. Fantastic.
What a weird finish to the season for Jurgen Klopp. And I know we won't go into Liverpool too much, but that's kind of got to be one of the highlights of a Man United fans' week as well. We've not had much to cheer, but seeing that spat on the touchline was quite funny, wasn't it? But
before we go, speaking of managers, can I just ask one quick question before we go? Obviously, Dave, you mentioned earlier you were at Old Trafford. What was the atmosphere like? Like, what was the fans' reception to Ten Hag? Because I saw that there were boos when Mainu came off. Like, does it feel as poisoned when you're in the ground as it does from the outside?
I think, if you hear comments that fans make, about not just the players, but I think the general feeling around the club, but particularly, obviously, the manager, I think there's a little bit of acceptance now that he's probably not going to be here next season, which is... It's kind of sad for me in a way, because I think he's a likeable guy, like Ten Hag. And obviously with what he did last season, I think it carried a lot of promise. So I think there's a lot of disappointment there from United fans, because I think there was a lot to be positive about of last season and coming into this season. Obviously, it seemed like we were going in the right direction. Obviously, the buyout and the ownership obviously Jim Ratcliffe coming in. So there was a lot of positivity, but the season really is kind of just it's just petered out, hasn't it? Massively, really.
Well, when you're saying things like that, United are one of the most entertaining teams in the league, at their best.
It's true.
That makes for the wrong reason.
It's very entertaining.
But I think that makes fans realise that maybe his eyes aren't as open as they should be. I know we can't throw his team under a bus completely, but a bit of honesty.
He's done it enough times.
I think for the fans, I think it's I can see why it's annoying, and particularly the mood is the way it is, because I think seeing how they're performing, it's really difficult to get behind that.
Yeah,
it's really difficult to get behind the team while they're playing like that, and get behind the manager, because I think they've seen how bad we've been in the last 10 years, and it. I think Ten Hag's comments after the game, him saying we think we're one of the most exciting teams to watch at the minute. I don't think the fans are seeing the same thing as what he is.
No. Well, I was trying to finish the podcast on a positive note with talking about Everton and laughing at Liverpool, but we've just soured that now. Cheers for bringing us back down to earth. What I will say is congratulations to Leicester City on their promotion back to the Premier League. That feels like it was in question for a little while, but they're definitely the best team in the league, I think. So yeah, well done to them.
Do you know what, Mike? This is evidence of why we need you as host, because sleuth-eared listeners of last week's will notice that in the introduction, I talked about how we were going to discuss Amorim to either West Ham or Liverpool. Then not only did Dave and I not even speak about it, he's now issued an apology to the Benfica fans about even meeting West Ham, and Liverpool have appointed someone else. So it's a good job. We need you, Mike, for that stability.
Well, happy to jump back on board and steer the ship as always. Thank you so much for listening. We really appreciate your time and your support. And if you've made it through the whole audio or video podcast, well done. Good for you. It's a hard listen.
It's not a battle.
Isn't it? No, it's not. But please engage with us. Leave comments, press follow, press like, press subscribe. All these things really do help our growth, and we are so grateful for them, because the amount of fans we interact with on here makes it so worthwhile, doesn't it? Like from all different sort of backgrounds and all different parts of the country, parts of the world even. We talked about Wrexham the other day, and that brought out so many different people from everywhere talking about how Wrexham have come to the fore again with another promotion. So yeah, we really do appreciate it, and your continued support. Thank you so much. We love it.
When you talk about glamorous parts of the world, you didn't just mean Wrexham, that's not that far from us. I'm guessing you mean like America and Canada as well.
Well, I think Wrexham is almost intrinsically tied to America and Canada now, isn't it? Because of their ownership. Like Thank you for the clarity. That's exactly what I meant. Although no slight on Wrexham whatsoever. I'm sure it's got its own charm.
We saw it. We've
did,
seen it on the show.
And we'll look forward to the next season of Welcome to Wrexham, because that's been great. But thank you guys. That's it for this week. Speak soon.